Vinod Matkar, the Mumbai Ghost, arrived in America with nothing but ambition, and in less than a year he became the most feared gangster the streets had ever seen, leaving rivals dead and law enforcement clueless. Please subscribe for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. Vinod Matkar was born in the labyrinthine streets of Mumbai, where narrow lanes and crowded markets hid a world of survival and danger. From the earliest days of his childhood, he observed the city's harsh realities, the way shopkeepers paid protection money to local gangs, the nightly clashes between rival criminals, and the fear that settled over neighborhoods like a dark fog. Life had taught him early that weakness invited exploitation, and intelligence could become power if wielded without hesitation. He was small for his age, but sharp, with eyes that missed nothing. By the time he reached his teens, he was already learning the unspoken rules of the underworld: who could be trusted, who could be manipulated, and who would betray you at the first opportunity. His adolescence was spent navigating the thin line between survival and crime. He ran errands for minor gangsters, carrying messages, delivering packages, and observing the way seasoned criminals commanded loyalty through fear and respect. Vinod's mind absorbed everything: the strategies, the hierarchies, the patterns of behavior. He learned to calculate risks faster than anyone else on the street. By the age of 17 he had become a problem solver for small-time rackets, a boy who could think ahead while others acted impulsively. It was not long before his first taste of power came in the form of small extortion schemes and informal protection deals. While others his age were still trying to finish school, Vinod was learning the subtle arts of negotiation, intimidation, and survival in the shadowy corners of the city. The turning point in his young life came during a gang conflict that erupted over a disputed shipment of contraband. Several older gangsters were caught off guard by Vinod's audacity. He proposed a solution that no one expected, one that minimized losses for all sides but allowed him to gain influence. His boldness and cunning impressed the senior figures, and for the first time he was no longer just a street boy running errands. He was a strategist whose mind could outmaneuver experienced criminals. Word of his intelligence and fearlessness began to spread through the underworld. Vinod's rise was not without danger. He made enemies as quickly as he made allies. There were nights when bullets shattered glass, and men with knives lurked in the shattered glass, and men with knives lurked in the shadows, testing his resolve. Each threat he survived strengthened his reputation, and each close call honed his instincts. By his early 20s, he had amassed a small but loyal crew and controlled several profitable operations, from smuggling to gambling dens. Yet despite the apparent success, Vinod remained restless. He understood that Mumbai, for all its chaos, had limits, and his ambitions stretched beyond the city's borders. He dreamed of expanding his empire internationally, of stepping into a world where the rules were different but the stakes just as deadly. The city that raised him had taught him everything he needed to survive. But Vinod knew that survival was only the first step. Domination was the ultimate goal. Vinod Matkar's arrival in the United States was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to escape the constant heat of Mumbai's underworld while still carrying his ambitions with him. He landed in New York, under a carefully constructed false identity, blending into the vibrant Indian communities scattered across the city. On the surface, he appeared as an ordinary immigrant, trying to build a life in a foreign land. He rented a small apartment in Queens, shopped at local markets, and frequented the temples where other immigrants gathered. Yet beneath this calm exterior, Vinod's mind was always calculating, always observing. He noted who carried influence, who held grudges, and who could be manipulated to serve his plans. His initial operations were small, designed to avoid attention while testing the waters. Underground gambling dens became his first foothold, attracting local patrons with promises of discretion and high stakes. Slowly he expanded into informal money transfers, leveraging connections with Indian businesses that required quick, untraceable methods to send money abroad. The cash flowed steadily, enough to fund further ventures and cement his reputation among certain circles. What set Vinod apart was not just his audacity but his ability to study the patterns of American crime networks, learning their rules while bending them to his advantage. As weeks turned into months, Vinod's influence grew. He formed discreet alliances with local street gangs, who controlled different parts of the city. Unlike other foreign criminals who relied on brute force, he used strategy, persuasion, and intimidation to assert dominance. His reputation as a silent, calculating force spread quietly. Local criminals began to whisper about the Mumbai Ghost, a man who arrived seemingly out of nowhere, yet immediately altered the balance of power. Gang members who had dismissed him at first began to reconsider, wary of provoking someone who moved with the patience of a predator. But Vinod's rise in America was far from smooth. Rival gangs saw him as an outsider, a threat to the turf they had controlled for years. Threats were made, warnings delivered in shadowed corners of Brooklyn and Queens, yet every attempt to challenge him failed, often with disastrous consequences for the aggressors. Vinod orchestrated retaliations that were swift, calculated, and almost invisible. One rival found his car sabotaged and bank account emptied. Another faced an unexpected police raid. Vinod had carefully manipulated events from behind the scenes, leaving no trace of his involvement. Fear of him spread faster than admiration, and he learned that in this new world, invisibility was as powerful as reputation. Despite his growing empire, Vinod remained methodical. He avoided flashy displays that would attract law enforcement. His operations were layered and compartmentalized, each segment of his network unaware of the other, ensuring that no single arrest could unravel his plans. He studied American laws as closely as he studied criminal behavior, always staying a step ahead of authorities. By the time a few local journalists and police officers began piecing together fragments of his story, he had already shifted his activities to other cities, spreading his influence from Chicago to Los Angeles, leaving a trail of quiet domination in his wake. Vinod Matkar's entry into the American underworld marked a turning point, not only in his life, but in the balance of criminal power across multiple cities. He was no longer a small-time gangster from Mumbai. He had become a strategist, a ghost, and a force that rival gangs and law enforcement alike struggled to understand. Every move was calculated, every risk measured, and every victory silent yet undeniable, proving that the Mumbai underworld had a new emissary, one who would reshape the game entirely. The streets of New York were unforgiving, but Vinod Matkar had already learned to navigate danger like breathing. His reputation had begun to spread beyond the Indian community, reaching the ears of local gangs and seasoned criminals who controlled territory across the city. They underestimated him at first, assuming a foreign gangster would be no match for their experience and muscle. Vinod, however, thrived on being underestimated. He observed patterns of behavior, memorized routines, and found weaknesses in even the most fortified operations. What the city didn't know was that he carried the lessons of Mumbai with him, where betrayal, violence, and cunning were the currency of survival. The first real bloodshed in his American chapter came unexpectedly. A rival gang, irritated by his growing influence, attempted to corner him with a late-night ambush in a dimly lit parking garage. Vinod had anticipated the attack. He had arranged surveillance and strategically placed men, all disguised as ordinary civilians. The rival gang arrived expecting an easy strike but were met with chaos meticulously orchestrated to leave them exposed. By the time the sirens in the distance drew near, 2 men lay dead, and the rest scattered in fear. No one connected the incident directly to Vinod, but whispers began circulating about the ghost from Mumbai who struck without warning, who vanished as suddenly as he appeared. Vinod's approach to violence was as calculated as his business moves. He never acted out of impulse, and every confrontation was an extension of his strategy to consolidate power. Those who crossed him disappeared quietly, some vanished without a trace, while others were humiliated publicly to serve as warnings. Yet, even amidst the violence, he maintained a sense of order within his growing organization. His men knew loyalty was rewarded, and betrayal was punished without mercy. Vinod's leadership was both feared and respected, a rare combination that allowed him to control the underworld without drawing immediate attention from authorities. The ripple effects of his actions began to reshape the city's criminal landscape. Local gangs became cautious, constantly second-guessing their moves and avoiding direct confrontation. Vinod's influence extended to subtle manipulation of alliances, controlling disputes between rival factions to his advantage. By the time anyone realized his true reach, he had already positioned himself as a silent power broker, using fear and intelligence to dominate without overtly challenging the entire criminal network. Despite the success, the stakes were high. Each violent act increased the risk of law enforcement attention, and Vinod knew that a single mistake could unravel everything he had built. He relied on discretion, using intermediaries for sensitive operations and keeping his own hands clean of direct involvement. To the outside world, he remained a ghost, present in rumors, absent in evidence. His ability to strike fear without being physically implicated became a hallmark of his legend. By the end of this chapter in his life, Vinod had fully transitioned from a rising immigrant criminal to a force the city could not ignore. The streets had been stained with blood, yet every act served a purpose, reinforcing his dominance and reputation. Rival gangs now moved carefully, authorities began to notice patterns, and the myth of the Mumbai Ghost began to take shape. In the shadows of New York, Vinod Matkar had become more than a gangster. He was a calculated, deadly presence whose legend was only beginning to unfold. Vinod Matkar had established himself as a ghostly figure in New York, but he was not content with quiet dominance. He wanted a statement, something audacious enough to announce that he was no longer a hidden player but a master strategist, capable of shaking the city's underworld to its core. The opportunity came when an armored truck carrying millions in cash for a high-profile financial firm became the target of his meticulous planning. While most criminals would have rushed in recklessly, Vinod treated the heist as a chess match, calculating every move, anticipating every reaction, and leaving nothing to chance. Months of preparation went into the operation. He mapped out routes, studied security schedules, and monitored law enforcement patterns. Using a network of trusted insiders, he acquired detailed schematics of the transport procedures, while simultaneously creating contingencies for any unexpected interference. Every participant in the heist was carefully chosen, not for brute strength alone, but for intelligence, discretion, and loyalty. Vinod's ability to coordinate the operation from the shadows without leaving a paper trail was unparalleled, a testament to his strategic mind. On the night of the heist, everything unfolded like clockwork. The armored truck was intercepted in a desolate stretch outside the city. Lights were cut, communications jammed, and the guards were subdued using non-lethal but highly effective methods that left them disoriented and compliant. Vinod's team worked silently, loading the cash onto unmarked vehicles and ensuring no witnesses could connect them to the operation. The precision was remarkable, not a single mistake was made, and yet the entire scene was engineered to look like a routine traffic disruption. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Vinod and his crew had vanished into the urban maze, leaving authorities stunned and frustrated. The aftermath was explosive. Media coverage dubbed it the heist of the decade, speculating on how such an audacious robbery could occur without leaving clues. Rivals in the criminal world were both terrified and impressed. Vinod had demonstrated that his power extended beyond subtle manipulation or calculated violence. He could strike decisively, control outcomes, and disappear without a trace. Yet even as the public scrambled for answers, Vinod remained invisible, observing from a distance, analyzing reactions and planning his next move. The heist did more than just enrich him, it transformed his position in the American underworld. Local gangs who had once doubted him now treated him with caution, and in many cases, respect. Law enforcement increased their efforts, but Vinod's layered strategies ensured that no direct evidence linked him to the robbery. His empire, previously quiet and strategic, now carried a new level of fear and influence. Each subsequent move was calculated to reinforce the myth of the Mumbai Ghost, a figure who could control entire cities from the shadows, leaving no trace of his presence except for the results of his actions. By the time the money had been dispersed through offshore accounts and carefully structured shell operations, Vinod Matkar had firmly cemented his status as a master strategist and fearless operator. He had not only demonstrated his audacity, but had also sent a clear message. In this new world, he was untouchable, unpredictable, and always ahead of both rivals and law enforcement. The American underworld would never see him the same way again, and every criminal, every cop, and every opportunist now had to acknowledge the presence of a man who played the game at a level they had never imagined. Vinod Matkar's success in America brought him more than wealth and influence. It brought him allies and enemies in equal measure. As his empire grew, he found it necessary to form alliances with local crime families, some long established and others just rising to power. These partnerships were never built on trust alone. They were transactions, carefully calculated to serve mutual interests while maintaining Vinod's ultimate control. He treated alliances like chess pieces, moving them when needed, and discarding them when they no longer served a purpose. Loyalty was rewarded with wealth and protection, but betrayal carried consequences that were swift, brutal, and unforgettable. Among his closest associates was Rakesh Sharma, an ambitious criminal with connections in multiple boroughs. For a time, Rakesh proved invaluable, helping Vinod secure territory, launder money, and coordinate operations across state lines. Their collaboration allowed Vinod to expand into Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami, turning what had started as a New York-centered operation into a nationwide network. Yet even as they appeared united, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Rakesh coveted Vinod's power and quietly plotted to take a piece of the empire for himself. He believed that with Vinod distracted by multiple operations, he could orchestrate a move that would eliminate him and leave the network under his control. The betrayal came in the form of a meeting set under the guise of business negotiations. Rakesh invited Vinod to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, confident that he could trap him. Vinod, however, had anticipated the possibility of treachery. He had learned long ago that in a world ruled by crime, loyalty was fragile, and every ally carried a hidden knife. The moment he entered the warehouse, he observed subtle signs: the misplaced tools, the slightly altered locks, the faint tension in the air. These were enough to alert him that something was amiss. Rather than confront Rakesh directly, Vinod slipped away unnoticed, leaving his would-be betrayer exposed to a web of consequences carefully orchestrated in advance. Within days, Rakesh's plans unraveled. Key shipments he relied on failed, trusted contacts turned against him, and law enforcement raids seemed to target his every move. Vinod had leveraged his knowledge of the criminal network, combined with Rakesh's overconfidence, to turn the tables completely. The betrayal served as a stark warning to anyone who considered challenging him. Vinod Matkar was always one step ahead, and defiance carried fatal consequences. This episode reinforced the duality of Vinod's world. Alliances were necessary, but they were temporary, and every relationship had to be managed with vigilance. His empire now operated like a living organism, with each part carefully monitored, controlled, and adjusted as needed. Fear and respect worked in tandem to maintain order, and the legend of the Mumbai Ghost grew. Rivals learned to tread carefully, associates learned the limits of loyalty, and law enforcement struggled to understand a man who seemed untouchable, whose network could absorb betrayal without faltering. By the end of this period, Vinod Matkar had not only expanded his influence across the United States, but had also perfected the art of control through psychological warfare, strategic alliances, and ruthless consequences. Every ally, every rival, every subordinate now understood that in Vinod's world, survival required more than cunning. It demanded absolute awareness of the invisible hand that moved every piece of the underworld with calculated precision. Vinod Matkar's growing empire inevitably drew attention beyond the criminal underworld. Federal agencies had begun noticing patterns: suspicious money flows, sudden spikes in underground gambling, and a string of violent incidents that defied explanation. At first these signs were disconnected fragments, small anomalies that seemed unrelated. But as investigators pieced together intelligence from surveillance, wiretaps and informants, a picture began to emerge of a highly organized criminal mastermind operating across multiple states. The realization that an unknown foreign figure could manipulate entire networks without leaving a direct trace sent waves of urgency through law enforcement. Despite the increasing scrutiny, Vinod remained untouchable. He had anticipated that his actions would eventually trigger investigation and had prepared for it meticulously. His operations were divided into layers, each isolated from the others, so that even if authorities uncovered one segment, the rest of his network remained intact. He relied heavily on intermediaries, making sure that his personal involvement was almost invisible. In addition, he embraced technology in ways many traditional criminals ignored. Encrypted communications, coded messages, and early experimentation with cryptocurrency allowed him to transfer large sums without detection, keeping law enforcement perpetually a step behind. The tension escalated when federal agents began targeting some of Vinod's associates. A few were arrested, questioned, released after providing minimal information. Vinod used these moments as lessons, tightening security protocols, changing routes, and moving assets offshore. The raids served a dual purpose. They demonstrated to the underworld that he could weather law enforcement pressure, while also teaching him how to anticipate and counter investigative strategies. Vinod treated scrutiny not as a threat, but as a challenge, sharpening his instincts and strengthening his control over the empire he had built. While authorities closed in, Vinod moved with remarkable subtlety. He avoided flashy displays, public gatherings, or any situation that could expose him. Meetings were short, discreet, and constantly relocated. Trusted lieutenants acted as buffers between him and the street operations. He monitored developments from safe locations, studying news reports, internal intelligence leaks, and gang chatter, always adjusting plans in real time. His ability to manipulate events from the shadows without leaving evidence created a layer of invisibility that frustrated law enforcement at every turn. The cat-and-mouse game intensified as agents began to realize they were chasing a ghost. While they could trace financial anomalies or investigate violent incidents, connecting them directly to Vinod proved almost impossible. Each operation he conducted was designed to create misdirection, ensuring that authorities focused on decoys while the real orchestrator remained hidden. His knowledge of both American criminal networks and international operations allowed him to blend into multiple spheres, avoiding detection even as his empire expanded geographically and financially. By the end of this period, Vinod Matkar had cemented his status as a criminal mastermind whose brilliance lay not only in audacity but in his ability to evade capture. The authorities were aware of his existence, but he remained a shadow, always present yet unseen. Every arrest, every raid, every investigation that failed to connect to him reinforced his legend. The Mumbai Ghost was no longer just a figure whispered about in underworld circles. It was a name that haunted law enforcement offices, a symbol of a criminal who was always ahead, always calculating, and impossible to touch. Vinod Matkar's empire had grown so vast that direct confrontation was no longer necessary to maintain control. He waged a hidden war, a conflict fought in the shadows where subtlety was more lethal than bullets. Rival gangs were still eager to challenge him, testing his dominance with minor incursions, territorial disputes and provocations. Vinod had learned long ago that overt violence drew unwanted attention, both from the public and law enforcement. Instead, he employed strategies that were invisible yet devastating, manipulating outcomes without ever exposing himself directly. Every move was calculated, every strike precise, and every enemy eliminated quietly, leaving only fear as evidence of his presence. The first wave of this hidden war involved financial sabotage. Vinod identified the critical revenue streams of rival gangs, gambling operations, illicit loans, and smuggling channels, and disrupted them systematically. Accounts were frozen, shipments intercepted, and key partners turned against them through bribes or subtle threats. Within weeks, his rivals found themselves hemorrhaging money, unable to sustain their operations. They could not understand how their empires were crumbling from within. The realization that a hidden force was dismantling them without firing a single shot sent panic through the underworld. Vinod also employed psychological warfare to sow distrust among his enemies. Rumors were seeded carefully, alliances between rival gangs were tested, and long-standing partners were manipulated into betraying each other. The Mumbai Ghost became more than a criminal. He became a symbol of uncertainty and paranoia. No one knew when or how he would strike, and that uncertainty was his greatest weapon. Competitors began doubting even their most loyal lieutenants, fearing that any move could provoke retaliation from a strategist they could not see. By destabilizing alliances before they could solidify, Vinod ensured that his dominance remained uncontested. Violence still played a role, but it was surgical and symbolic rather than chaotic. Minor provocations led to accidents, staged confrontations or orchestrated hits that left no trace pointing directly to him. A key enforcer, who challenged his authority, disappeared one night, and by morning the message was clear. Vinod Matkar controlled the city silently but completely. Each disappearance, each incident was designed to reinforce his myth, instilling fear while avoiding full-scale bloodshed that could draw police scrutiny. The hidden war extended beyond immediate rivals. Vinod manipulated city politics, local businesses, and even law enforcement insiders, maintained strategic advantages. Every layer of his empire was interconnected, providing him intelligence about potential threats long before they could materialize. In this way, his empire operated as a living organism, with Vinod as the unseen brain directing each movement. Even when authorities increased pressure, they could not trace patterns that revealed his direct involvement, leaving them frustrated and confused. By the end of this period, Vinod Matkar had transformed the concept of gang warfare. He was not merely a gangster, he was a tactician, a manipulator, and a phantom whose influence extended across cities. Rival gangs were cowed into submission, fearful of unseen threats. Law enforcement was perpetually a step behind. Vinod's hidden war proved that power did not always need to be visible. It could be absolute even when silent. The legend of the Mumbai Ghost had reached its zenith, leaving the underworld and authorities alike in awe of a man who could dominate entire networks without ever revealing himself directly. Vinod Matkar's reign in the underworld reached a point where his presence was felt everywhere but seen nowhere. By the time he began to retreat from the limelight, his influence stretched from Mumbai to multiple American cities, his empire built on fear, cunning, and a network so vast that no one could fully map it. Law enforcement had tried to pin him down for years, but Vinod had mastered the art of evasion. Every move he made was calculated to leave no trace. Every operation compartmentalized to protect the larger structure. The man who had arrived in New York as an ambitious immigrant had become an untouchable force, a phantom that haunted both rival gangs and authorities alike. Even as he stepped back, his empire did not falter. Loyal lieutenants maintained control over territories and operations, each guided by principles Vinod had instilled: intelligence over force, discretion over display, and fear balanced with respect. Rivals understood that challenging the Mumbai Ghost was futile. Attempts to encroach on his turf were met with subtle but decisive consequences. Operations that once relied on overt violence now ran silently, with influence wielded like a shadow, manipulating outcomes before conflicts could even arise. Vinod's control had become institutional, a system that could survive his absence while continuing to dominate the criminal landscape. Disappearance, however, was never an act of retreat, but of strategy. Vinod faded from public view as deliberately as he had risen, leaving behind only whispers, rumors, and fragmented evidence of his existence. Some claim to have spotted him in dimly lit alleys, in unassuming cafes, or at night along waterfronts, always observing, never intervening. Others believed he had returned to Mumbai or moved to a foreign city to rebuild a new empire elsewhere. This ambiguity only added to his legend. The man who could orchestrate citywide chaos while remaining invisible had become a myth. The Mumbai Ghost was no longer a criminal. He was a story, a cautionary tale, and a symbol of unparalleled cunning. Even long after his disappearance, the impact of Vinod's operations lingered. Gangs operated with caution, avoiding reckless moves. Law enforcement, frustrated by unsolved crimes and unexplained disappearances, constantly revised strategies to anticipate the return of a mastermind they could never catch. Business fronts, offshore accounts, and money laundering operations continued to generate revenue, sustaining his influence in subtle ways. His methods became a blueprint for others in the underworld, though none could replicate his precision or foresight. He had set a standard, showing that fear, intelligence, and strategy could outweigh brute force and visibility. Vinod Matkar's story transcended borders, merging the underworlds of Mumbai and America into a single legend. He had turned vulnerability into power, anonymity into control, and violence into a silent instrument of authority. While his physical presence vanished, his influence remained a ghostly force, shaping decisions and striking fear in hearts without ever needing to appear. In the end, Vinod did not simply survive. He created a legacy untouchable, untraceable, and immortal in the annals of criminal history. The Mumbai Ghost was a reminder that some legends do not die. They disappear into shadows, leaving only their myth to dominate the imagination of those who dare to cross paths with them.